Hello and welcome to a different type of video from the Radio Mechanic. Today I'm going to make a video in response to a YouTube video I saw. Craigslist Hunter on YouTube, who is, by the way, kind of one of my heroes. He has a trading post in Crystal Lake, Illinois, and he's a rarity these days. He's an honest businessman with a real conscience, and watching him and Vicky bring stuff into the store and barter around with the customers, it's just a lot of fun to watch. But in this particular video of his, it was the title was "This Radio Almost Killed Me." Somebody came in with an All-American 5 AC/DC set in a wooden case, and to me it looked like a very desirable radio. I would have loved to get my hands on it. But it had a knob missing, and of course, like most people who don't understand, the complexities of these radios, I'm going to try to keep this discussion extremely non-technical, as simple as I can, for Peter and anyone else who has a buy-in trade place and brings these radios in. My train went right off the track there. The first thing he did, of course, was plug it in. And immediately it started with an extremely loud hum, which was more likely this component, which is called a filter capacitor, was open in the radio. And he walked around talking to the customer while it sat there humming, and I was cringing inside because I was waiting for this to go short circuit, which they are wont to do, and wipe out the rectifier tube. You should not plug these sets in for several reasons, which I'll cover here. Two, had that capacitor been functional and not humming, I guarantee one of these wax type capacitors, and these are basically just paper and foil rolled up like a jelly roll, dipped in wax. These typically never lasted more than 10 or 15 years. That radio was probably 60 or 70 years old. And the problem is, one of these goes to the grid of the audio output tube, the control grid, and I guarantee it's leaking voltage, which it's not supposed to do. It won't be leaking a liquid, it's going to be leaking DC voltage. It puts the output tube, the audio output tube, into a runaway condition where it is running well past its power limitations, its power specifications, let's put it that way, and you can damage the tube seriously. In the case of this little guy, this 50C5, which is the audio output tube, a new old stock one from tubedepot.com is $40 plus whatever they get to ship it. $40 for one tube. Now, surprisingly, tubes like the 50L6, they're only about $10. Now, you can get these cheaper, of course, on eBay, tested. But if you want a new old stock for your customer's radio, or to fully restore the set, $40 for that one tube. And that can be destroyed because the radio is turned on and left on with one of these bad capacitors. This rectifier tube, this one's a 35W4. If this filter capacitor goes short circuit and he's down the other end of the counter or just daydreaming, it's going to burn up the rectifier tube. Now, as for the shock you got, Peter, if you're watching, I hope you are, this is just, kind of inform you on what to look for on these radios. On the bottom of the set, probably had one of these little tube charts, and there'll be a series of tubes. In this case, it's 50C5, 35W4, 12SQ7, 12BA6, and 12SA7. Well, that first number, the 50, the 35, the 12, 12, and 12, Those are the heater voltages, or the filament voltages, in these tubes. If you add them all together, it totals 120 volts. That's because these radios do not have a power transformer. The more expensive sets of the day would have had one of these inside, a device that looked like this. This is a power transformer. Turning one of these on can even be more catastrophic, because even though this safely isolates the radio from the AC line and eliminates that shock that you got, if this filter capacitor goes bad, the power drain can burn up the secondary winding of this transformer. These are virtually unobtainable. Finding an exact replacement for one of these transformers is probably 1 in 100,000. If you can find one with the right voltages, they typically won't fit in the same mounting hole, and a lot of times there isn't room on the chassis to put a different transformer. It has to be the exact one that fits in that hole, or you've got to do a terrible hack job to try to fit something in there to make it work. These are virtually unobtainable. Vacuum tubes are still surprisingly fairly common, because when people threw out a radio, they would pull the tubes out of it, but they seldom, if ever, remove the power transformers and save them. And finding a match for that radio is going to be impossible. What happened to you, Peter, if you're watching, is these types of radio typically, now this one's been restored, it's got all new capacitors in it at this point. Typically, one side of the AC power cord is connected either directly to the metal frame or is connected to the frame through one of these capacitors. One of these capacitors will go from the AC line to the chassis. You notice this plug, both prongs are the same size. They can plug into the wall in either direction. Now, one side is going to be hot or live, the other side is going to be neutral. If you plug it in so that the hot side is connected to the chassis, and then you touch your display case frame and grab this knob, which is what you did, and I was screaming at the screen as you were reaching for it, no, because I knew what was going to happen. And it lit you up pretty good, because one side of the plug being directly connected to here, you have the hot side connected to the chassis, one of the wires goes directly to it, or like I said, through one of these capacitors, and you had your hand on the display case, which is probably grounded. So you completed the circuit from the hot side to the ground, and you're lucky you're a healthy guy. You survived. A lot of people have been killed. When these sets come in with that type of tube complement, 50, 35, 12, 12, 12, that means there's no power transformer in there. It can have these octal style tubes in it. They're called octal because they have 8-pin positions and there's a keyway. Or they can have these miniature tubes which come in 7 and 9-pin configuration. This radio happens to be a transition set where they were starting to convert over to the miniature tubes, so it's a combination of the two. But with that typical lineup of 50, 35, 12, 12, 12, or sometimes there'll be two 35s and some 12s. But when you see those high numbers, you know this radio does not have a transformer inside, and it's going to have a hot chassis. That's why they were inside of plastic cases or wooden cases with either wooden or plastic knobs, and typically had a back on them that somewhat limited access to the metal. However, in the case of this set, you've got 2 screws going into there that are exposed, and the screws on the bottom of the case go right into the chassis. So there's still a shock hazard, but at least it was safe back in the day to operate the volume control and the tuning knob. That shock you got doesn't mean there was anything wrong with the radio per se. It just means that you got unlucky and put the plug in the wrong direction, touched the metal shaft, and grounded yourself. I virtually guarantee that that radio was totally restorable, and I would have loved to got my hands on it. It was just a nice looking old set. Sadly, what probably happened is the guy went outside and threw it in the dumpster because you got a shock on it. He didn't know any better either. Another piece of history gets thrown away. Now, what to look for? Well, I've told you about the tube lineup. Sets with these power transformers in them are typically going to have tubes in the 6 volt region. They'll be like a 6L6, 6SA7, 6SQ7. Usually they will be of the octal type. They can be glass. This happens to be a rectifier. Again, it's got the 8 positions, although there's only 5 populated pins. This is a rectifier. These tubes can come in metal configuration or glass configuration. There'll be a 5 volt tube. Because of technical reasons, they use a separate 5 volt filament for the rectifier and 6 volts on the rest of the tubes. They won't give you the shock normally. But again, you should not plug them in. The best thing to do, and this is going to sound counterintuitive because everybody wants to, well, I just want to know if it works. And just figuring out if it works, even if it plays, you're doing damage to the audio output tube, because I guarantee these are leaking voltage and overdriving that tube, stressing that tube. The best thing to do with these sets when they come in like this, turn them around and cut the power cord off the back of them. Because the people who are going to restore these sets, the people who know what they're doing, would rather see the cord cut off. And you tell them that you were advised to do that. It removes your liability for shock, because the guy's going to have to put a cord on it, and he'll be replacing it, if he knows what he's doing, with one of these polarized cords. Small lug, big lug. It can only go in one way, and he'll ensure that the large lug, the neutral or cold side, is the side that gets connected to the chassis. And or rewire the power switch to ensure that the switch is switching the hot side. Some of these sets switch the low side. What else? Oh, different types. Very early sets from like the 20s region will have this type of a base configuration. Either 4 pins or up to 7 pins, but you notice there's no keyway. They're going to have numbers with no letters. This is a 226. Now this is a UX 226, but nothing after the number. This one happens to be a... well, this one's a 6A6. I lied to you. There's an exception. Usually they come with numbers like 57, 27, 43. Here's a 57. That is not the heater voltage on these tubes. It's just a type 57. These types of tubes were transitional tubes. Here's one that's only got 5 pins on it. And this is probably a 43 or something. Yeah, this is a 43. This is an audio tube. I don't know what the 226, I think, was an IF amplifier or a triode. I'm not sure. I don't remember off the top of my head. No pins. These are tubes. Well, not no pins. No keyway. The keyway is the configuration of the pins. Just like on the 7 pin or the 9 pin that I showed you, the missing pin is the keyway. On this tube, the 2 larger pins are the keyway. These are, 1920s, maybe up to the 30s. Probably a fairly desirable set, especially if it has tubes with these envelopes in it. Again, don't plug it in. Chop the cord off it, sell it as is. Later on, you got into the octals and the 7 and 9 pin miniatures. Those are 2 radios from the say 30s into approaching the 40s, 46, 47, up through the war. They were transitioning to these, but they were still using up old stock. And there's one other kind I can show you. These are called Locktel tubes, L-O-C, Locktel. Let me take it out of the bag here. This has a locking pin. It's designed that when it goes into the socket, it snaps into position and stays there. Now, the ones that are marked 7 volt, 7F7, so on and so forth, start with a 7, have a letter and another number. These were early car radio tubes. The idea was they snapped into the socket, and the vibration of driving, they would stay in place. And the 7 volt filament is because back then you had a 6 volt auto battery, but while it was charging, the voltage would get up as high as 7.5 volts. This tube, the 1LH4, this is called a battery set tube. These were designed to run on either a big dry cell or D cells in a portable radio. A lot of these radios would run on AC 120, DC 120, or internal batteries. They were AC-DC battery sets. Very common in the late 20s, early 30s. They have a special power cord on them. It's called a curtain burner. The ones that would run on AC. It's because inside of the asbestos power cord, keep that in mind, asbestos power cord, there was a long, thin resistance element that dropped 120 volts AC down so that these 1 volt tubes would operate. Sometimes they were 3 volt tubes in there as well. Again, you want to cut the cord off. The people who restore these understand what it's all about. Take that cord, clip it off, coil it up, put it in a plastic bag, and dispose of it properly because it's full of asbestos. The reason they were called curtain burners is the cord got warm in operation because of the resistance element, and if you coiled it up and tucked it away under the curtain, it would get real hot because you're concentrating all the heat, and they could start fires. And again, anybody who understands these sets and understands how to restore them won't mind at all that the cord is missing. In fact, I would rather find them missing. When I got this radio, the cord I could tell had been coiled up, and this radio had never been plugged in. It had about 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch of dirt inside of it, dust and dirt. And it had every one of its original waxy paper capacitors in here, and a filter capacitor that was clipped in here, very similar to this one that clips into that holder. This isn't the one. I did some tests. You know, I know how to go in here and check the things before I power this radio up. I went in and I replaced the filter cap, and I replaced this one capacitor down here to the audio tube so that it was safe to power it up and test it. There are steps that can be taken to safely turn these on. We also use something called an isolation transformer. That's that blue box up there with the 2 meters on it. Has an isolation transformer and a variac to adjust the output current, but the isolation transformer is very important for working on these sets because it isolates it from the line. I can go in here and work on it, and if I happen to be grounded on the edge, in this case, this workbench this is one of 2 of my labs. This one has a metal frame on it, and it's grounded. And if I wasn't using an isolation transformer, I could really, really hurt myself. Okay, tried to keep this simple. Tried to keep the technical aspect of it as understandable as possible. Again, one side of this wire is typically connected to the frame on the tubes that have a lineup of 50, 35, 12, 12, 12. There's no power transformer. If you look in the back and see a power transformer like this, then you can probably rest assured that most of the tubes are 6 volt with one 5 volt filament or heater, and it's isolated normally from ground. However, even in those sets, they sometimes had one of these going from the power switch to the chassis for noise elimination. These are for, the one that goes to the ground or to the frame from the power is for noise suppression. These go bad, and those types of radios can still give you a hell of a belt if this capacitor is bad. My advice is don't plug them in. I would rather walk into your shop and see the power cords clipped off. Doesn't deter me from buying them at all. The only person that's going to deter is the person who doesn't understand these radios and wants to just test it because I want to see if it works so I can take it home and use it. Well, you can't use it safely or without damaging parts until all of these components are changed out. Even if the set turns on and plays, you walk away from it for 5 minutes, something goes short circuit, you blow up a $40 tube or an irreplaceable power transformer. And believe me, I've got a box full of these downstairs, and in 60 years of doing this, I've probably found one transformer that fit in the hole properly and had the right voltage to replace it. They are unobtainium. Okay, I guess that's it. I love your show. I love watching you and Vicky, by the way. I think I said that at the beginning. I hope I did. This is just an informative video for the guys out there who take these sets in and want to resell them. Plugging them in and turning them on is doing more damage to the internals of the radio. Just cut the cord off, put them up on display. It's very desirable if the back is with the radio, because on this type of radio, that is the antenna and part of the automatic volume control circuitry. It feeds the voltage into one of the tubes. If it doesn't exist, the cardboard part can be replaced. The hard part is getting these coils. So if the radio comes in and all of the mounting ears are broken off, but it still has the back, save the back, because it's going to have this wire on it, which can be transferred to a reproduction back. And for some reason, the camera just shut itself off, which I don't understand. Okay, so if it's missing some knobs, there's reproduction knobs available. If it's missing the back, drop the price down a little bit. That set that came in with that gave you a shock, I would have instantly offered him $10 or $15 for that radio, just so I could restore it back to operation. Understanding why you got the shock, understanding why not to plug them in should go a long ways towards saving a lot of these pieces of history. When they come through the door, if they're mostly complete, most of the tubes or all of the tubes are in there, the speaker's intact. With these bakelite radios, cracks in the case can be repaired. This one had a crack running all the way down the side here and had a crack along the bottom and over the front. That's been repaired. If there's small pieces missing, they can be done with fiberglass and repaired. Of course, if the whole case is missing and there's nothing but the chassis left, even it's valuable, because somebody might have a bad chassis and a good case, or there may be parts in here that are usable. So don't be afraid of them because it gave you a shock. Just don't turn them on. That way you're not damaging the set. Or if you insist on turning them on, make sure you use a knob so that you don't get belted again. But the best policy is cut the cord. That eliminates your liability for anyone getting a shock. And again, anybody who knows anything about restoring these, is going to cut the cord off anyway and put a polarized plug on it. That's it. I'm the radio mechanic. Hope that this helps to save some of our antique radios, and I know people are going to come out of the woodwork. Well, you didn't tell them this and you didn't tell them that. I'm trying to keep it simple, guys. I just want to save as many of these old sets as possible. There's more and more of them ending up in the landfill every day, and the history is going away. Take care. See y'all soon. Bye.